Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. In the 1950s, George Reeves embodied the Man of Steel in Superman's first television adaptation, from its gritty black and white beginnings to the kid-friendly color years. To this day, an entire generation reveres George as their Superman, while for others, the show remains an overlooked chapter in the character's mythology. On this podcast, we bring everyone together as we break down each episode of Adventures of Superman. Welcome to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Season 2, Episode 16, The Clown Who Cried, is comic book artist and returning guest V. Ken Marion. Welcome back.
What is up? Thank you for having me to talk another exciting episode of The Adventures of Superman.
Yeah, you joined me for a couple of Season 1 installments, and now you're back here as we're kind of in the final stretch of Season 2. I guess let me just ask you, I know we talked about your overall experience with the show when you were here during Season 1, but just kind of overall feelings, impressions, memories of Season 2, anything that you want to share?
I actually, watching this episode this morning, I actually did remember watching this like way back when I first got the DVDs, with watching with my dad, which was kind of interesting. I feel like both the episodes we talked, all the episodes we talked, have had that kind of like rush of memories coming back with it. But yeah, that's my experience with the show was as a real little kid, catching them every once in a while on Nick at Night or TV Land or whatever channel they were on back in like the early 90s. And then I never really watched it after that until I got into college when they came out on DVD. And I watched like all of the black and white ones with my dad. And then when it switched to color, we kind of bailed off because we didn't feel like it was as good once it got to color. But yeah, I very fond memories of the show in that regard. And like, it reminds me of my dad and good times with him. And this was his Superman, as he always tell me. George Reeves is like his definitive Superman. So it's a fun show. And I feel like it's so different from like what people in general think Superman is, and B, like all the other takes of Superman. Like it's very, very unique in that regard.
Absolutely. And I think when we get to the climax of this episode, there's something in particular that really stood out to me that speaks exactly to what you're talking about how this was a pretty singular version of the character, or at a minimum represents a different brand of justice in a different era, very unlike what we would see in the more modern years. So let me give the overview of the episode, and then we'll share our impressions about it. So this aired on January 2nd, 1954, written by David Chandler, directed by George Blair. I'll give my fairly detailed synopsis, just to kind of lay it out for everyone, if anyone hasn't seen the episode or hasn't seen it in a while. Circus clown Rollo finds former partner Crackers in his tent. They recount how they parted ways years ago over an argument about money. Crackers is present as Kent and Lois ask Crackers to make an appearance during a telethon to raise $500,000 for the Fresh Air and Milk Fund for the children. After the reporters depart, Crackers knocks out Rollo and takes his place. When Jim later sees Rollo's legs behind a trunk, Crackers, as Rollo, brings Jim to strongman Hercules, who binds Jim in chains. Kent sees Jim's predicament with X-ray vision, and after sacrificing a pair of glasses to divert Lois, changes into Superman and rescues Jim. They find Crackers back in the clown tent, but he convinces them he's Rollo and that Crackers merely made off with his paycheck. The next night at the telethon, the weary Daily Planet crew powers through. When the audience clamors for Superman, Kent uses an unsuspecting guard as a shadowy decoy and reappears as Superman to encourage donations. Finally, Crackers, as Rollo, performs, then holds up the event and makes off with the cash. In our climax, Henderson and the police follow as the real Rollo, who managed to free himself, and Crackers climb to the roof of the building and tussle. One pushes the other over, then falls himself. Superman arrives in time to save only one, and correctly catches Rollo, knowing that the real Rollo would never have pushed someone over. Overall impressions of this one, my friend?
Well, for my big takeaway watching it this morning was that clowns are creepy as hell, and like even though they're trying to make this Rollo the clown at the beginning, this like I don't want to say he's a celebrity, but he's supposed to be like a big draw for this fundraising event. I'm like, this guy, this face paint, this looks so creepy. Like, no wonder like the Joker and stuff have become like and killer clowns and all this stuff has become a thing because they just look weird. But aside from that, it's a very quaint story. Yeah, I don't know what are your takeaways, because a lot of it I thought was like, oh, that would never happen today. Like, of course, obviously, but like even for back then, I think a lot of it was stretching the limits of reality, you know. But for a kid show, it's it was fun.
Oh, look, I'm always honest, right? I always share when I like or don't like an episode, but look, are there times where I do sort of pull my punches a bit because I know that there are people who grew up watching these episodes in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s and watch them as a kid and have such strong memories and every episode is somebody's favorite. I'm always aware of that. And so when I don't like something, I do try not to just dump all over it. This is one, I don't have much good to say about this episode. I really did not care for this. I think it's the weakest of the season 2 entries that we've looked at so far. There were a couple of bright spots, I thought. Clown creepiness aside, Rollo, I think, is a sympathetic character. He's a good guy. He's clearly concerned about helping the telethon succeed, raising the money so all these kids can go to camp. He really works.
Very naive person. Crackers is a real dirtbag right from Jump Street when you meet him. And I'm like, how is this guy even friends with this guy?
I know you wanted more of that backstory there, but Rollo, and he works tirelessly to free himself. I mean, when we get to the telethon portion of the proceedings, the amount of times we cut back to Rollo in that tent trying to free himself, I probably could have done with one or two less of those cutaways, but he really worked. He went above and beyond, chasing Crackers to the rooftop of the building. So I feel like he was a sympathetic character, but at the same time, I feel like you can only get so invested in these characters that we just meet. So that was a bright spot. I really did like, if I had a favorite part of the episode, it's probably the Hercules sequence where we get to this business with the strongman. What did you think?
I'm glad you brought that up. That the Hercules guy, that was something that I was watching this from. I was like, how far we've come in movies. That where like this guy would be like on like 10 different rounds of steroids before being this part, or this guy like just looks like a regular guy. That was funny. I mean, his character was again like so like dumb and two-dimensional. Like in terms of like the character's intelligence seemed like so dumb. Like he's like, oh, I don't have a conscience. I think he said that. I'm like, wow, okay.
It's funny because so that moment where he says, I don't have a conscience. And then in the first scene when Rollo and Crackers reunite, and I think it's Rollo who's like, oh, we haven't seen each other since we parted ways after we had an argument. I'm paraphrasing, but it's the exposition is so
exactly
clunky. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit on the nose. I feel like we could have maybe brought forth that information a little bit more elegantly, but when you bring up that line about the conscience, to me, they kind of fall in that same category. I did like that when we first meet him, this big, strong, tough guy is terrified of the little mouse. I thought that was a fun little bit of business. It genuinely made me laugh when he tells Jim that I'm going to show you a trick, sit down. And Jim's like, I'm already sitting. It just made me laugh.
Oh, yeah.
And then the fight, as it were, between Superman and Hercules,
cool.
right? Where Hercules is throwing the barbell and the kettlebell, they just bounce off him. And then he tries to, he wraps his arms around Superman and tries to move him, but he can't. And then Superman bends the barbell around him. I thought that was cool.
Yeah. And he just like hits him on the forehead.
Yes. You know, I would have preferred a punch, but it's all right. We're in season 2. Well, it's funny because I was looking on.
He still gave him CT damage.
Yeah, that's true. But I was looking on, I guess it was IMDb trivia or goofs, and someone pointed out, the way Superman wraps the barbell around Hercules, he could have just shimmied his way out. I disagree with that because I feel like I get their point, but I feel like the way the barbell is bent, That would take some maneuvering to try to get out of that. So I feel like IMDb goofs I feel like they were a little harsh on that moment.
Yeah. Well, I was actually wondering what those barbells were made out of, because like, do you think they were like foam? Like, or like, what do you think they were? Or like when he bends it, like what was that it would retain its shape? You know, I was very curious about how they filmed that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, some sort of wire maybe on the inside. I mean, I don't know. That is a good question.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, they must have been super light, right? They couldn't have been like these have any weight to them whatsoever, because like when he throws them at George Reeves, like they literally just bounce off. So I was like, that it looked good because that guy was selling that they were heavy. Like it looked like they were heavy weights that he was throwing around, which is good.
Before we go further, let me quickly showcase our guest stars here. So we had Billy Wayne as Rollo, Peter Bracco as Crackers. He had a role in season 1 and he'll be back in season 4. Mickey Simpson was Hercules. But the one that stood out to me that I was delighted by, and I had forgotten that he was in this episode, and it's a small part, the character Tim, who's at the telethon counting up the money that's being raised, is an actor named Charles Williams, who was Cousin Eustace in It's a Wonderful Life. One of my absolute all-time favorite movies, my favorite holiday movie. I watch it every Christmas, and I was just so delighted to see him.
Gotcha. That's awesome.
Yeah, so that was cool. Oh, well, speaking of the donations and just the money business, so $500,000 in 1953 would be almost $6 million today. I mean, this was a lot of money to send these kids to camp.
Yeah, no, I was clocking that. I was like, that's a lot of money. And I was like, weren't people only making like $3 a week back then? Like, that's like a hefty amount of money to like be asking. And then when they're taking the pledges, and when someone's like, oh, $2 pledge, thanks. Like, okay, that makes sense. And then someone's like, $1,000 pledge. I'm like, who's doing that in 1950, whatever? Crazy.
Yeah, it was a lot. I mean, that's $500,000, a lot of money today, let alone at that point in time.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, they wanted high stakes here. And I guess also the idea is not all of it is coming in as cash, right? People are calling in their pledges or they're sending a check or whatnot. So there's only so much cash on hand. So I guess they had to make it a high enough amount that even if only a small percentage of it was cash in hand, it would still be worth going through this process to rip it off. We have a moment here, and this is not the first moment of the season. In fact, by my count, it's at least the third in season 2, where Lois sees Clark without his glasses.
Oh, I want to talk about that. Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. So like that proves that the theory that, so there's one of two things. Okay. Either it's not the glasses that's the disguise. It's just his overall mannerism as Clark Kent. And people just like cannot fathom that Superman is anyone besides Superman. Right. Or they all know he's Superman and they're all talking in this episode like, come on, Clark, let's get Superman. Like, it's almost, you could almost read it in a way that like everyone's like pretending to think that he's not Superman, but they all do. They all kind of know.
Yeah, honestly, that's always been my headcanon. And I know what we see ultimately does not support that, but I really do kind of like that view, that interpretation. But to your first point, I think that is the takeaway. I think that's what the takeaway kind of has to be. But I don't think that's a bad thing. This notion that it's not just the glasses. I like that idea. I mean, if it were only the glasses that are keeping people from putting this together, then I think it really all falls apart. But if it's this idea that people just don't make this connection, couldn't fathom that they're one and the same, the fact that it's not just the glasses, it's his overall attire and the way he conducts himself, even though, as we've talked about on the show many times, this Clark is very capable, confident, assertive. He's usually...
He is Superman.
Yeah, I mean...
Like, he literally is Superman, yeah.
The instances where he pretends to be meek or scared or whatever you want to call it, they're relatively fleeting in the grand scheme of things in terms of how we see Clark behave. But we see that enough where it's like, okay, I think that has to be the takeaway. So it's funny because I know this is a moment that fans talk about. Again, this is another instance, just like Panic in the Sky and just like the episode at the start of the season. It doesn't bother me so much that Lois sees him without the glasses and doesn't recognize it because, again, it's not just the glasses. It can't be just the glasses. But it is just striking to see. And it also begs the question, was there no other way for him to get rid of her? Right? Because he sees Jim with the X-ray vision through the tent all bound up. And she won't let Clark out of her sight because they have to get to the telethon because he's like emceeing this thing. And so the only thing he could come up with is pretending to drop his glasses and step on them, and then telling Lois, I have to go to the office to get another pair. And that is enough to kind of get her to leave him alone. I feel like there's some other way he could have gotten rid of her, but yeah.
Absolutely. And also the fact that he's going to be on TV as Clark Kent and Superman.
And this is not the first time. In the Big Squeeze episode with the Man of the Year recipient who had the criminal past, who's being awarded this Man of the Year recognition. At the end of that episode, Clark, as Clark, goes on television and makes this public service announcement, essentially about giving people a second chance. And we talked about it in that episode. It was such an odd choice to me to have Clark do it, or it felt like the message would resonate more with viewers if it were Superman. And it's also one of those things where you would imagine Clark would want to keep as low a profile as possible. So here again, the fact that you have him going on television in both of his identities is wild. Yeah. I mean, he's really pushing his luck.
Yeah. It's quite funny. Yeah, but again, suspension of disbelief. I think it's like one of those things, putting my mind back into like my 8-year-old self or whatever that would have been like the target age demographic watching it. Like I wouldn't have questioned any of it. I would have just been like, this is cool. I get to see Superman, I'm sure if you showed this to your son now, he'd probably be like, this is fun,
Maybe. And especially when you get into the clown act, when they're at the telethon, right? When you have, Crackers pretending to be Rollo doing his bit, and then later the real Rollo. Yeah.
Yeah. I was actually going to say the stunt, that clown stunt where he's like he climbs up this tower and he's like shaking back and forth. It's like, I don't know how tall this tower is, like maybe like 15 feet high or whatever. And like they pull way out so you can see they shoot the entire set, and he like actually falls backwards and like does like a backflip off the tower and rolls onto the ground. And like I was impressed by that. I was like, that was like a really good stunt for the show, like that was very cool.
Yeah, it was cool. It's one of these things that there have been episodes in the past that I haven't liked, and I feel like I've been able to pinpoint why a little bit more specifically. Here, it's tough. It's hard for me to kind of put my finger on what didn't work for me about this episode. I guess I just didn't feel the tension the way I wanted to, or I feel we should have. I guess my level of investment in Rollo only went so far, and in terms of this telethon, yes, I want it to be successful for the kids, but I don't know. Maybe it would have been helpful if the kids had been represented by someone, by some kid who was there, who was cheering them on. I don't know, something to kind of pull us in a little bit more. There was something that was missing, and I wish I could articulate it more specifically, but something was just absent here for me.
Yeah. Or if like the money because it was to send kids to summer camp. That's what it was.
Yeah.
I mean, if it was like a little more like important, like kids who like a children's hospital or something, like I feel like that would have made a bigger difference too. It would have made Crackers look like way more of a dirtbag,
I know, maybe subconsciously that I had this feeling of like, this is an awful lot of money just for camp. I mean, I don't know, maybe that was part of it. I think you know what it is too. We also get to a point where, and I know we're jumping around a little bit, but again, we had our roadmap at the beginning, so I feel like we have some flexibility here in terms of where we go in this discussion. But when we get to the point where Crackers holds up the telethon and he runs off with the money, Clark is about to go after him, and Lois stops him. She's like, "Oh, don't be a hero, Clark. You're not the type." Right? Yet another instance.
I'm like, since when?
Since when, as we always talk about, since when? I guess what kind of bugged me about this is, why did Clark have to listen to her in that moment? Like, oh, Clark, don't go. I mean, he could. Here's the thing. Earlier in that episode, we had this whole bit where, to preserve his identity when he changed to Superman to make this appearance, he enlisted this guard, right, to sit behind the door and take a rest and eat a sandwich, right? And Lois kind of saw that shadow and thought it was Clark. So he could have very easily said, like, oh, I'm going to get the guard. I'm going to get the police. He could have kind of come up with something that would have allowed him to exit. I guess the idea that in that moment, he would kind of go, kind of kowtow to Lois and hang back and just call Henderson and risk letting this guy get away with all the money. I couldn't really reconcile that. Again, I know it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback and rewrite these episodes, but if it
80 years later,
if it hadn't been that Crackers pointed a gun at them and took the money, they could have made it that he snuck off with the money and they didn't realize it right away. And by the time they realize it, he's gone. then I buy this a little bit more. But it's just like in that moment, I just feel like Clark, this man of action, would have come up with some excuse to chase after. But it is what it is. On this note of Clark, though, when we catch up with Clark and the Daily Planet crew on the second night of the telethon, right? The night that Rollo is supposed to make his appearance, and Clark is doing his MC thing up on the stage at the microphone. Very weary. I mean, this guy he's really been through it.
His ties pulled out, his shirt's ruffled. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah. It was making me tired. I watched it this morning when I was eating breakfast, and I was like, oh, this is not a good way to start the day because I want to go back to sleep.
Yeah, he really sells that. I mean, do we think this is Clark just putting on an act, or is it not so much that he's fatigued, but he's really just kind of tired of doing this? Because I'm saying to myself, this is a running bit here on this podcast about how this Clark is a man about town. He's got quite a robust social life, as we get hints of here and there. He knows about the Tip Top Club in one of the earlier episodes. And I'm saying to myself, I feel like this telethon is really cutting into his time at the Tip Top Club. I feel like he really wants to get this. And we also know how impatient this Clark is. I feel like this is, I know he cares about the kids. He wants to raise the money, but I feel like this is torture for him.
That's a good take. That's a really good take. When the money's stole, he's like, damn it, I got to do this all over again.
Exactly. And I wonder to myself, why do you think he delayed showing up as Superman for so long?
I don't think he could. That was the issue, right? Is that like he was stuck like on camera?
Yeah.
Wasn't that like the thing?
Yes, I suppose. But I don't know. He could have done something. Just this is less me nitpicking the episode and more me getting inside Clark's head, audience. I'm saying to myself, he could have, from the jump, he could have been like, oh, I talked to Superman and he wants to kick things off. Right? Like he could have done something like that.
Yeah.
Because it makes such a difference. And clearly all of the audience members they're calling in, they're clamoring for, they all want Superman. And I think they could have anticipated there would be that desire to see Superman. So it's just funny to me that Superman shows up so late in the game after Clark's just been slogging through this telethon.
Yeah. Well, I think it's even funnier that like, because Superman shows up, people start donating way more money.
Yeah, and well, the fact that the quote unquote celebrity moves people to action, unfortunately, I do get it. But to the show's credit here, it's not just that Superman shows up. I mean, yes, I think there's excitement to see him, but I think the message he delivers is an effective one about how I've made Metropolis my headquarters and I've tried to provide a good, clean, safe city for all of you. We all have to do our part. So I did like that it wasn't just, he flies in and he says, everybody donate. He actually kind of made this more personal plea to the people. And so I'll give the people of Metropolis the benefit of the doubt. I like to think that while the thrill of seeing Superman was a big driver, I like to think that the message that he delivered also resonated and moved them. So I'll go with that.
Cool.
Speaking of being moved by things, not in an emotional sense, but just kind of having a reaction, when Crackers posing as Rollo squirts Jim with the flour, squirts the water in his face when they're back in the tent earlier in the episode.
Yeah.
Boy, does Clark think that's funny. Whoa.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like the funniest thing he's ever seen.
He I was going to say that in general, he's very amused by the Crackers Rollo whenever he does anything. And I just kept thinking, like, this isn't funny.
Yeah.
Like, he thinks that is so funny when he squirts him in the face with the water. It's like,
I know.
Crazy.
And even with the real Rollo at the beginning with what I assume was a chocolate gun or some edible gun when he takes a bite out of it. And Lois and Clark think that's so funny. I guess there was this anticipation that the kids watching the episode would find it funny. So I guess they wanted Clark to kind of be in line with that.
You know what though? Like my grandpa and grandma, that I feel like that's the kind of humor that they had. Like I feel like both my grandma and my grandpa, rest in peace, they were amazing. But that's like I envision them thinking that that's super funny. And like things that like I think are funny, like they're just like, huh? You know, so like maybe it's a sense of humor for the time, you know?
Fair. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of two of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. So what's interesting here, and this is kind of bringing us full circle when we talked about, again, this version of the character and this brand of justice and the era. At the end of the episode, Superman is put in, I think, a pretty interesting predicament where he sees both of these clowns fall. One of them is pushed, one of them just falls off the building. But as Crackers is dying in Rollo's arms, what struck me, and I don't say this as a judgment on the character, to be clear, because again, I think this is very much in keeping with this era. And hell, we go back to the episode that we cite all the time, but the stolen costume in season 1, after Ace and Connie fall off the mountain that Superman has put them on because they know his identity. There is not an ounce of remorse over the fact that he put them on that mountain. They did not heed his advice, but still they fell to their deaths. The Clark at the end of that episode is as pleased as punch that the situation has resolved itself. Here, it's just interesting.
Not my Superman, though.
but isn't it so interesting? You think about how this would play in subsequent iterations of the character. The fact that he couldn't save both of them, even if one of them was a criminal and a thief and a would-be killer, and in fact is a killer, because Crackers has a line about how I've killed men for less money. So this is not a good guy, and the show establishes that. But even still, I feel like the modern Superman would have a reaction to the fact that he wasn't able to save both of them, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. He would be like distraught for episodes after this, with racked with guilt and tormented about it, for sure. And like, man, okay, so this kind of goes to my bigger sort of opinion on Superman as like a character and overall. Like, I understand the no killing thing, right? And I understand the save life at all costs. Like, I think it's very noble and aspirational. And it's like, and I get why it's on the character, because it's something that you want to impart to people, especially younger people who are getting the characters like life is sacred, don't hurt people, it's like their thing, right? But at the same time, when you make his whole identity just being like self-torment because he can't save everyone, I think it makes the character less fun. This show, for as much as we're like poking fun at it, this show was very popular when it was on the air, and Superman was like the most popular comic book character there was. A lot of it because of the show. So I do think that this ending of this episode, probably not a single kid batted an eye at this back then, but if this aired today, Twitter would be alight with like flame wars of people saying, this isn't my Superman, or this isn't a badass Superman, this sucks, or like, and they're just like back and forth, and it's like, guys, calm down. Like, it's like, I think this works just fine in a sense. Like, he doesn't, like, he's not Jesus. Like, he's not supposed to save like, he's like literally, like, my version of the Superman is like, the one that I like is very much like this version where it's like, he's got limitations, right? The Superman has limitations. And like, I think that's okay for Superman to have limitations in these stories. I think it makes him a more compelling character in a lot of ways.
Yeah. What I appreciate about this is that it's not always the case that he can save everyone. And sometimes he does have to make a choice. And from a moral, ethical perspective, I don't think you can begrudge him the choice he makes, right? He saves the quote unquote good guy in this instance. And what I will say, no, this is not a Superman racked with guilt, and I wouldn't expect him to be in this show, in this era, but I doubt this was scripted. I even wonder if this was in the direction. In my gut is that this was a George Reeves choice, but I couldn't say for sure. but Superman does hang his head when Crackers perishes. And it's a tiny moment. It's just the very end of the scene, but he lowers his head. And I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into that, but I think that does capture in a second or two what we're talking about, where I think the fact that he couldn't save Crackers, it does register with him, right? I don't think he's callous about this, right? He's going to be fine in the next scene. He'll be fine in the next scene, as we see as the telethon goes on and they hit their goal and all of that, and the real Rollo performs. But there is something in that moment there. So to the show's credit, or George's credit, whoever was responsible for that hanging the head, I think does sum up a lot. Yes, it's a far cry from the character being racked with guilt for episodes to come, like we would see today. But there was something there. There was something there.
Yeah. No, for sure. And like I said, like I think it is important for the character to not kill people. Like I do think that is a very important message for younger people, especially, is like you should cherish life. Like, you know what I mean? Like I think that is a very altruistic, important aspect of the character. But like we just said, I do like that he's not this dour, sad person because like he can't do everything, you know? And like, I think this is that kind of sweet spot where like he is, like this Superman's not a bad guy. Like Superman is still very much like stand up, do the right thing at the best of his ability, you know?
Yeah. So again, like I said, I didn't bring that moment up to it, not as a criticism. I was really just kind of an observation, and it was striking just to see this iteration of the character and how he responds in that situation. But no, I agree with you. I don't think anyone really would have batted an eye at that at the time, and understandably so. I think in terms of how it's presented and the version of Superman we're talking about here. I did look up some reviews of this episode, and one of the things that people pointed out was why is Clark / Superman not able to tell these clowns apart? Right?
You're right.
I know Crackers dresses himself up and makes himself up to look like Rollo, but it's not like they're dead ringers for each other, which that could have been the thing, because they were former partners, right? So it could have been that it was some sort of twin act, whether they were actually twins or they just looked so much alike. That could have been interesting.
Yeah. I wonder if that's what it was, because Rollo had 2 identical clown costumes in his dressing room.
Yeah. So, but anyway, that's talking about what the show could have been, not what it was. So I don't know. Is there anything else we haven't talked about with The Clown Who Cried that you want to before we give our final Fedora rating here?
I feel like we pretty much exhausted this episode. I think we deep dived on this episode way more than the makers of the show probably intended anyone to do.
Fair enough. So
yeah,
out of 5 fedoras, 5 being the highest rate, how many fedoras would you give The Clown Who Cried?
I would give it a solid 3, right down the middle.
Okay.
I would. Maybe your reaction tells. See, I haven't watched enough of these episodes in a row to like in comparison, but I will say I wasn't mad after watching it. Right, it wasn't like I wasted my time. Like I had fun watching it. It was it was a nice trip down memory lane in terms of like the nostalgia hit of like 1950s era Superman. It wasn't bad, but I don't think it was like a great. This is not something I'm going to remember like 3 days from now. So I give it like right down the middle.
A 3. All right. Hey, listen, your rating is your rating. I know I had a bewildered look on my face, but no, that's all good. For me, I'll go 1.5 on this. I'll go okay. A 1.5. This really, again, I think was my least favorite of season 2 so far. Again, for people who grew up loving this episode, it's your favorite episode. Keep loving it. I wish it resonated more with me, but it's something about this just didn't click for me. Like I said, though, I think what earns it that extra 0.5, because honestly, I was going to go 1, but I think what earns that extra 0.5, I really did like the Hercules business, the humor with Jim, and then that little bit of a fight that we got. I thought that was cool. I really did like that aspect of it. That was probably the highlight of the episode for me. So that was The Clown Who Cried. So Ken, I'll put the link to your link tree in the show description here so people can check out your social media pages, your projects, your crowdfunding campaigns, all that. But what in particular would you like to share with folks about what you're doing, what you're working on?
I have a creator-owned book called Battle Chronicles Soul Striker that I co-wrote with my friend Jason, and I did all the art for it. And we crowdfunded on Kickstarter, and we have a round 2 of funding now on Indiegogo, and it's currently in the process of being colored. And so we're aiming to get the books out. We're hoping by December. So yeah, if you like superheroes, fantasy, sci-fi, any of that kind of cool stuff, please go to the link tree that Anthony is going to share in the notes, and check out my link for Battle Chronicle Soul Striker, and consider supporting independent creators for the first time in owning my own property and do my own story. So I'm very excited about it.
Awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to see the finished product, and I encourage everyone to check it out. So thank you, Ken. Thank you, audience. Always appreciate you tuning in. Whether we love the episodes or we don't, I appreciate you tuning in. And, the last thing I'll say as we sign off, for anyone who really does love this episode, please tell me why. Like, I mean that sincerely. I would love to hear what about this really grabbed you, because I always want to keep an open mind. Do I anticipate I'll rewatch this again anytime soon? Nope, probably not. But if and when I do, like when this complete series Blu-ray appears, we're still waiting for news on that as of this recording. But I would love to kind of keep that in mind. So please, if you love this episode, tell me why. Make sure you come back next week for another all new episode. And until then, as always, remember, only Superman can do super things. This podcast is made possible by the support of our Patreon community. Sign up for a monthly or annual membership at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato and choose from a range of rewards. This week, I want to spotlight our Daily Planet Bullpen tier, available for $1 a month or $10 for the year. Members at this level are the first to know about upcoming coverage and get to submit a comment or question to be read during the episode. Sign up today, and thank you to all patrons. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey, a weekly exploration of Superman's vast 85-year mythology, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.